Let's go. Okay, so yeah, I'm really happy to have you, as I was saying, because you for me, I was reflecting about what's my intention for the interview yesterday. My first intention is to offer to my audience your how wise you are, and you're really one of the only people I followed for more than a year and reading every story and reading everything and learning something each time you post something. So yeah, it's great, and I'm happy to be here. And my first question is, why don't you scale that content? Because your content is so amazing, and you do stories, and it's like um, it's almost a waste of content. What's your thoughts about that?
Yeah, firstly, thank you for having me on your podcast. This means a lot to me, and thank you for following me on my journey with the work that I'm doing
Mm.
and consuming the content that I put out. It does give it meaning. People spending the time consuming my content, um, it gives purpose to the content.
Mm.
Otherwise, I'm sending the content out into. To answer your question, why don't I scale it? That's a great question. That has been a question that I've been asking myself for a long time, and it is my intention to solve that problem this year.
Okay.
Now, and this is something that I'm working on.
Okay.
It's and the part of the challenge that I have faced with scaling this content, and it's mostly been an internal challenge, has been how do I ensure the quality is maintained at the scale that I'd like it to reach? Because what I have seen is that scale can sometimes compromise quality.
Yeah.
And that was a concern for me. But what I realized was that that was more of a story I was carrying more than it
Mm.
was a truth
Yeah.
when I started to inspect the belief and my understanding of that. There is some truth to it, but that is not the complete truth. That's not everything. That's just a story I was telling myself. And honestly, I was basing that off the content that I've seen a lot of other people who have huge scale, significant scale, larger than me by multiples, and I saw a lack of quality in the content they were putting out, and I thought, well, I started to develop this belief that scale means quality decreases, but not necessarily. I I think the reason why the quality changed for them probably had nothing to do with scale and had to do with something else in
Mm.
terms of their approach or their thinking. So that forced me to reevaluate this belief. And coming into this year, I'm now looking at opportunities for me to truly scale
Mm.
in a sustainable way. Sustainability is important um, in
Yeah.
terms of being able to maintain the growth and the scale. But it's definitely it's a problem I'm trying to solve this year. That's a big challenge I'm trying to tackle this year.
Okay. By quality, it's the quality you produce, or the quality of the interaction, and yeah.
The quality of the result. So for
Mm.
me, whenever I'm putting content out, there's an intention behind it. The intention is to create a little bit of change in the person that's consuming the content. That change can be something as simple as just seeing whatever the topic is that I'm talking about a little bit differently.
Mm.
And if that's created enough change for them to start thinking about whatever that topic might be, I don't know, for example, self comparison, they start thinking about self comparison slightly differently. And for me, that means the content has done its job from a meaning standpoint.
Yeah.
From a commercial and a business standpoint, typically content is designed to generate leads, to generate an investment of time and attention so that we can eventually convert them into a paying customer. I know that will happen regardless of how aggressive or forward I am with that approach. But for me, the primary focus is, does this start to create an internal change for the person that's viewing or consuming my content? Because if they've associated a sense of change with something that I've created or produced, they'll then want to come back.
Yeah.
And so for me, my concern is that if I scale, that we stop creating those small amounts of change. And then it's just noise. We become part of the noise. And social media, as you're very well aware, is full of noise.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
I had this conversation with a friend 2 days ago about the dilemma between posting something that is converting and posting something that give value and maybe will convert the people in 1 year or in 2 years, but maybe these people will be will have lived in 1 year and you have lost a potential customer. So I think it's always a dilemma. Where is the conversion? Where is the value?
yeah, it's been a fascinating experience for me because I've been doing this for so long.
How
My
long?
intention was, I was thinking about this the other day. I think I've hit 13 years now, 12 or 13 years coaching. With a social media presence, I would say actively and intentionally since 2019, I believe.
Okay.
So that's not nearly as long. I did have a social media presence to begin with, and then I didn't like. I was predominantly on Facebook at the time, and I didn't like how Facebook was unfolding, and I wasn't getting the results I wanted, so I decided to step away. And then I came back into it predominantly on Instagram in 2019. And, now on YouTube and podcasting as well. But what I found was when I decided to fully invest myself in this vision for my career and my business, for me, it was always a long play, a long-term game. And so I wasn't ever looking for the quick sales. I wasn't ever looking to to run paid advertising to just try and generate leads as quickly as I tried that. And it sort of worked, but not really. It didn't convert into finances. It just converted leads because I didn't have a great funnel. And then I quickly made the switch to the framework that I was referring to before. The intention is, can I create some kind of content that serves the individual in creating a small amount of change? Because then I know they'll keep coming back. And eventually, when they are ready, they will raise their hand and say, excuse me, can you help me? Now, I had to trust that that was the process before it even happened. I had to trust that that was going to be what happened long term before I started seeing results. And to this day, when I get on a call with somebody who I've now got an extensive wait list for one-on-one coaching, it's the biggest it's ever been in my life. I think we're estimating about 18 months long at this point. And I will speak to somebody on that wait list and I'll have a call with them and I'll ask them, how did you find me? Just to get some feedback so we know what's working and what isn't. And they will say to me, this is what I hear with great consistency. I've been following you for a long time, for at least a year. And I found that every time I was consuming your content, you were just giving a different perspective. You were saying something different that was very unique to what I was hearing and everything else that I was exposed to. And it landed, it resonated, and it felt real to me. And to me, that's the validating feedback that I need to say this approach works. If I just continue with providing quality content, they'll put their hand up and say, can you please help me in some way? It's the organic approach, but it is much slower.
Yeah, and it requires passions. Yeah,
a lot of patience
because everybody wants to make 10K in 3 months, and your approach doesn't work for that.
No, it doesn't. No, and look, in all honesty, I have some clients who are starting in coaching, and they're asking me these strategic and tactical questions. How can I start generating 10K in the next 6 months? I'm like, get a job. I'm like, go get it. Just go and get a job, because what you will do, and this is somewhat controversial when it comes to the entrepreneurial space, because what they teach is very different. You're well aware. The entrepreneurial space is very much about, you need to be hungry, you need to be motivated to get sales, because that's what's going to get you to get the sales. And I say, if you're coaching because it's something that inspires you, and you're trying to generate money from that to feed yourself or to feed your family or to pay for your rent or whatever it might be, the level of anxiety and stress that you experience from trying to generate revenue from that business is going to make you show up as if you're completely desperate, because you are desperate. Now, we as the consumer or the customer, we can smell desperation from 1,000 kilometers away. It stinks. It smells like, the joke that I use is, it's like the perfume section in the department stores, right?
Yeah.
You walk into the department stores and there's all these different perfume stands, but you don't need to go near them, because the moment you walk into the store, you can smell 50 perfumes at once and it stinks. And you're like, this is too much. And you kind of need to step away from it. So I say to clients, if you're trying to generate money straight away from your business as a coach, and you don't have any other income somewhere else, it's like, before you step out onto social media, before you step out into the world every morning, it's like you spray on the perfume of desperation and everyone can smell it.
Yeah.
So if you've got some form of stability of finances elsewhere, and then you dedicate time and energy towards building a coaching practice in the meantime, there's no desperation in that. And you start showing up for the desire and the intention to just serve people, to help people. That's going to build a huge foundation for your business, more than the traditional approach, if I can call it that, which is build a funnel, throw lots of money at an advertising campaign at the funnel, and just convert like crazy as much as you can. It's controversial. I know some people don't like it, but I've seen it work.
Yeah. It is the way you've started 13 years ago. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. So 13 years ago, I was a nobody. Nobody knew who I was, and I didn't know how to start. And I started just by showing up and helping people through conversations. So the way that I typically encourage people to start, if they are starting, is just offer your help to people that you know. Don't charge, just offer help. They might say that they're wrestling with some kind of problem. If you have the solution to that problem, ask them for permission. Would you like some help with that? You don't just start helping them. You ask, would you like some help with that? And by asking them that question, you're giving them the opportunity to say, yes, please, or no, thanks, I'm fine. If they say yes, help them. Transform their life in one conversation. If you have the tools and the methods to do so, transform their lives in one conversation. I promise you, they're going to talk about you and this conversation they had with you with other people. And that's going to work. And if you just keep doing that consistently, you will eventually, you start charging people. And if you ask for money in return for a service and they pay you that money, you now have what we call a business.
Yeah. How long did you do this for free?
It was about 12 months.
Okay.
But it was very sporadic. It wasn't consistent. So if I was consistent, it would have only been 3 to 6 months maximum. But it was because I was unsure if I wanted to be a coach. So part of my journey was that I didn't even want to be a coach. It was my wife and my mother who said, you need to do this. And I was like, no, are you joking? Taking responsibility for other people's lives and giving them advice that might lead them in the direction that I'm now responsible for because I gave them advice? No, thank you. I don't want that responsibility. I'm struggling with my own decisions in my own life, and you want me to help other people with theirs? I'm not touching that. What was interesting was they kept showing me, they're like, yeah, but in social settings, when we're hanging out with friends or we're going out for dinner with people, you're having these conversations with people in these social settings where it's calm and relaxed, and you're having an impact on them through coaching, but you're just having a conversation. And they kept showing me the evidence that I was already doing it, which was really frustrating because I didn't want to see that. And then I couldn't ignore it. I thought, well, I suppose I do. I suppose I've got to, like, I'm doing this anyway, so why not charge for it? Was basically the question. And so I started to, but because there was so much reluctance and I was so apprehensive to do it. I was slow, I was sporadic, it wasn't consistent, and so I wasn't getting great results.
At the beginning of the conversation, you you say that you had I don't like this term, and I know you don't like it too, but you have a limiting belief about quality and scaling content. And after 5 minutes after you spoke about the way you prefer to the organic way to create a business, and how do you have a framework for knowing if your thoughts is something that is really intrinsic and that is who you are, or if your thoughts is a limiting belief? Because sometimes you can justify your belief by facts that seems real, and you start to convince yourself about something, and it seems true, but 2 years after you realize I was telling myself a fucking story.
Yep, that happened today. I was having a conversation with my wife. We were out earlier today together. And I was sharing with her that I've realized recently that I've had some beliefs around what it means to expand my business. That I had what I believed was a certainty and a conviction that the way I was seeing things at the time was appropriate. And that was, I was clear and nobody could move me on this thinking. And then I realized as I was, over the last, I'd say 3 or 4 days, I've been reflecting on this thinking. And I had this moment, this insight where I thought, well, hold on a second. Let me just inspect these beliefs a little more closely, because I want to see if there's something there that I think is serving me, but might actually be holding me back. And that's when I started to reflect on it. And I thought, well, hold on a second. If a client brought these beliefs to me, I would be the first one to question them. And I would be the first one to show them how that belief that they're carrying is actually holding them back from where they're trying to go. So, and I do this on client calls. Some clients are used to it, but when they're new with me, it can be a little bit shocking for them. Is we don't realize more often than not that we actually communicate our beliefs, but we're communicating them as a truth, as a fact, but it's actually a belief. And so we do this in conversation. We might be having a conversation with someone and we're constantly just sharing belief, but it's all disguised as facts. Right? And so I will spend time on client calls where they will share something with me, something they're trying to achieve. And I will ask them, so what do you think is holding you back? Why do you think you can't achieve that? And they'll start to tell me a story as to why, which is just a belief. But they state this belief as if it's true, as if it's fact. But I have because of the amount of experience that I've got with the amount of people that I've served and my own personal experience, I have so many data points of evidence that what they're saying is false. It's not fact. Because I've got all these different points that prove what they've said, just it cannot be fact because I've got evidence that says the opposite to what they're saying.
Yeah.
And it's only because I've been looking for the evidence. And so they will start saying all these different things, why I can't do this. And they'll tell me, without realizing it, they'll say 6, 7 different things as to why. And they're telling me six or seven different beliefs as to why. For example, there was one I was speaking to, I think it was on Monday in Singapore, and she was sharing with me why she was struggling with some dating choices, why she's struggling to date at this stage in her life, and why it's not working for her. And she went on to tell me there's no good guys online. There's no, the guys my age are only looking for one thing, right? It's what we hear. They're not quality people. They're not self-aware, all these different things. And she just kept going. And I let her go for about 90 seconds of just one after another. And she paused and she was waiting for me to say something. And I said, keep going. Let me hear the rest of it. And she did. But then after that pause, what I started saying was I started interrupting her like a little bird sitting on her shoulder. And every time she said something, I'd said belief. And she'd start saying something else. I'd say belief. Oh, but there's no quality. Belief. I'm not going to find anyone at this. Belief. And I just kept calling her out. Every time she said something, I said belief, 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 belief. She started getting frustrated, and then she eventually started laughing at it because she could hear how many of her beliefs were coming through and what was actually holding her back. And so it's interesting because your question around how do we know if we're telling ourselves the truth or if we're telling ourselves a belief, confirmation bias comes into play.
Yeah.
And we see this in social media. We see this in our feeds because algorithms tend to continue to show us content that we're engaging with. So it creates a positive feedback loop, which we call, in political terms, it's called an echo chamber, meaning you just basically hear all of the same things over and over and over again because you're seeking it to some extent.
Yeah.
And so I think to date we've got, there's a list somewhere. You could probably look this up. I think it's something like 188 or 190 different cognitive biases that we are working against. So at any given moment, we have a bias towards something in at least 188 different ways. That's what we're fighting against internally. And so for me, I say to myself, and I believe this to be true, nobody questions my beliefs more than I do, because I want to make sure that what I have as a foundation of beliefs is rock solid. Otherwise, it's like trying to build a house on sand.
Are
And so I ask myself,
yeah, are those beliefs written somewhere, or is it something you have on your mind?
No, I don't have a book or a notepad
Yeah.
or anything that I write them down. They're just beliefs I carry. And part of the reason is because I allow them to change. I know that where I am today, I would not be with the beliefs that I had 13 years ago.
Yeah.
There's no way in this world. It required me changing beliefs that I had to allow me to get to where I am today. I'm also aware that there are beliefs that I have today that are preventing me from getting where I want to go. And if I change those, I am significantly increasing the likelihood of getting there.
Yeah. Yeah. I was asking yourself this question because I'm asking this question for myself and I don't have the answer about, sometimes I question myself about, have you stopped doing business the way you was doing because you quit, or because it was not aligned with yourself? And I'm asking this question, and I'm not 100% sure about the answer, and it's difficult to see behind the story you tell to yourself, and to have and I'm looking for a magic trick that can allow me to know the truth.
Yeah, change the question. That's the best thing you can do, right? The fact that you're asking yourself this question shows a level of self-awareness that most people don't have. And this took me some time to realize this in my own life.
Yeah.
My mother used to say it to me when I was younger, and we were sitting at the dinner table as a family. And I would ask questions or I would say things and stuff like that. And she would just pause at some point and look at me and says, "Where do you go? Like in there? Where exactly do you go?" And I looked at her confused. I'm like, "What do you mean? Doesn't everyone think like this?" She's like, "No." And I didn't understand that at the time. Right? I was too ignorant to realize that. And she asked me this question regularly. She's like, where exactly are you going? I'm like, "What do you mean where am I going? I'm here. What are you talking about?" And then I didn't realize the insight into what she was saying until I was older as an adult. And I was confronted, and especially through the business, because I'm confronted by so many people who have a different set of beliefs to me, who are coming to me seeking my framework of thinking and saying, "I'd love to see the world the way you do." And I'll explain really simple concepts. And they're like, "I've never thought of it that way." I'm like, "Oh, really? Okay." Because I'm so used to the way I think things. And it's not because I'm better or I'm more intelligent. I just have a different view, a different lens. And I get surprised that people don't see that in their own lives. And so I think it's important. The reason I'm saying this for you is because I think it's important for you to recognize, and for your listeners too, that if you are asking yourself these questions, you're already doing something different to most of the people.
Yeah.
Just by asking the question, not even getting an answer, just asking the question. That immediately distinguishes you differently from everybody else. When I've struggled to have an answer to the question, when I don't have the kind of answer that I'm seeking, it's not because I don't have the answer, and it's not because the answer isn't there. It's because the question I'm using to get there is not revealing the answer. I think of the answer being a destination, and I think of the question being the path leading you to the destination. And so if the path that you're using is not getting you to the destination, use a different path, which just means using a different question.
Yeah.
Which is this is something I've put together in my own mind, but it kind of ties into something that someone we both know, John DeMartini, talks about. He says, a question is an ion on a quest.
Yeah.
It's a charge that's on a quest, seeking resolution, to kind of get a little bit spiritual and also scientific. And so the path is a quest to the answer, to the destination. And so if you're not arriving at the destination that you're trying to get to, change the path. And it's just sometimes changing the question. So, and can I use this question as an example?
Yeah, sure.
So you're asking the question, did I quit for this reason or for this reason? You're giving yourself only two options by asking or. In legal terms, we call this a leading question, because you're trying to lead the person you're questioning to an answer. You're trying to influence their answer, which is questionable from an ethics standpoint in the legal world. But from a psychological standpoint, you're actually sort of leading yourself and giving yourself only two options. I'm of the belief that at any given point in our lives, if we believe there's only ever two options, It's because our thinking has become really narrow. I believe there's always at least 4 options at any given moment. It's this, that, neither, or both. Or instead of this and that, it's option A, option B, neither options, or both options. So when you're asking yourself, is it this or that, you've only given yourself option A or B. But there's a third option that you haven't realized might be there. But because of the way you're framing the question, you can't even draw that third option out because you've cornered your thinking into only being one of 2 options. It's really subtle, but it's powerful, right?
Yeah, I love that. I can feel it. Yeah.
Yeah. Just by changing the question, just a little bit. You change the question a little bit and bang, the answer pops out. And it was there the whole time.
Do you ask yourself sometimes that you could have more impact and you could have more impact and you your view of the world is maybe wiser than a lot of people that have more impact than you?
Yes and no,
Yeah.
which isn't a fair answer. Yes, I ask myself, could I have more impact? And I assume when you say more, you mean wider, more people, or more volume.
Yeah.
Yes, I do ask myself that question. But then I also ask myself the question, why do I want more impact? So I want to question that. What's the motive behind my desire to have more impact? And this has been something I've questioned myself on for years.
Yeah.
And I still do. And I don't think I'll ever stop asking myself, to be completely honest. Because over the years, my impact and my influence has grown. It's hard to say this without sounding arrogant. But I have many clients and many people who follow me who have huge audiences, millions, and they work with me. And I know the impact they have. And so for me, when I first started, the vision for my work was to serve the people at the top of their game, leaders. Because I knew that if I could serve those people at the top and help them and change their experience of life, they will share the insights they got from working with me with their audiences. And that way I would have a profound impact. Maybe not necessarily getting the credit for it, but I would know that I'm having an impact on all these lives by serving these people at the top. I have believed that I would have more of an impact that way than if I tried to do it directly with a wide audience. I don't know if that's true, but that was just the way the vision unfolded for me at the beginning of my career.
Yeah.
Now, I've also been scared of that vision as well because of what that means. Serving people at that level means I have to really step up my game, and I've had to over the years to serve many people, yourself included. And so I've asked myself a lot, can I have more of an impact? And I believe I can. There are hurdles in the way. There have been hurdles in the way, internal and external hurdles over the years for me to experience that wider impact. But then I also question it. Why do I want that? Why does that matter? Will I get to the end of my life? The way I ask myself this question is, if I get to the end of my life and I have only served the people that I've served up until today, and that's it, will that be enough for me? I believe my answer is yes.
Sure. And
but then I also ask myself,
So what are your answers when you ask why do I want that impact?
The first answer that came to me when I asked myself that question was because if I keep what I know to myself, I believe that's selfish.
Yeah, I have the same.
And I will have prevented people from being able to experience what I can help them with from what I've learned, right? And some of it is all of the knowledge behind me that I've learned. And my experience and the lives that I've served. I feel like if I don't share that, that's selfish. That's my life wasted. Which kind of, it takes me back to, excuse the quick story, when I was struggling in the business many years ago, and I was willing to give up and I was willing to stop. I had this alarm on my phone. I don't use my phone for alarm anymore. I haven't for maybe 7 or 8 years. I don't know if you can still do it, but you used to be able to put a message or some text in the alarm. So when the alarm goes off, a message pops up as the alarm is ringing on the phone. And many years ago when I first started, I put a message with my alarm that woke me up every morning. And all the message said was, they're waiting for you. And for me, that was the audience I was yet to serve, the people, the clients that I was yet to meet and have an impact on. And that was what was getting me up in the morning. And that was keeping me going, even when I didn't want to. How big they are in terms of an audience size, I don't know. We'll have to have a follow-up conversation in 20 years and assess the numbers, I suppose. But for me, it feels like it's selfish. There have been times if it feels like it's selfish if I do not share what I've learned, that I'm keeping all these answers to people's questions to myself. But then at the same time, there have been times where I've wanted a bigger and wider impact because it makes me feel important. Like it's very much an ego thing in those moments. And so I question that. Why does my ego have the need to feel important? Why am I feeling that I need to be important to millions of strangers at this point in my life, whatever point that happens to be? And I will question that and I will drill into that. And usually I find it's just because I'm feeling unimportant in some way at that point. And I will work through that. And then the desire for this importance for my ego, gone. And I get back to like my true essence of like, why am I here? Can I serve?
Yeah.
The second question you asked me about, do I feel like I have a lot of wisdom that people with bigger audiences don't have? It's hard to say this humbly because it doesn't really sound humble, but I say this humbly. Yes, I do believe there is a lot that I've learned that contains more wisdom than I see in a lot of what very popular, very big names share. And sometimes I struggle with that. Sometimes I look at them and I think, shut up. And people ask me, they're like, what would you go on their podcast and like, can you see yourself on some of these people's podcasts? I don't want to mention names, but some of the big names in the self-help space. I'm like, maybe, but I don't know that they would like what I have to say, to be completely honest.
Yeah.
Because I would probably say a lot of things that contradict what they have to say. And so, that's something I suppose I have to accept about my industry.
Yeah. It's really interesting for me to listen to you because I have a more similar view of the world with you than with a lot of people. But I can, with hearing you, I can question some of my belief and some of my view of the world, because when it's me who speak, I cannot do that. But when I listen, I can. And it's like, yeah, because yeah. Why do you think it's better to address internally your need for importance instead of trying to fill it with external circumstances?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. The way I see it is that if we, and this is true for any aspect of our life, that we're chasing to fill some kind of void or some kind of emptiness within us, whatever it may be. And in this case, we're talking about a sense of importance. We could spend almost all of our lives chasing that. And our time, at least in this lifetime, is all we've got. It's the only currency we are all born with. And we don't know how much currency we've got until we find out when we run out, because that's different for everyone. And people will spend a lot of their lives trying to fill these voids through external means, but none of the external means reach the internal space. Nothing can reach the internal space other than going internally. And so I suppose I view it as a waste of time, almost, if I'm to dedicate maybe decades to getting these answers and to try to fill this part of myself that I feel is empty, rather than going inwards and saying, where do I have within me what I already need? Where do I have in my life what I already need?
Yeah.
Otherwise, like, what are we doing? I kind of ask the question, like, what are we all doing here?
I love your answer. It calmed me because
Amazing.
yeah, I relate to that, and but I don't think the same thing about why are we doing it here. Today, I think that people have different perspective and values, and maybe for somebody it's more fulfilling to pursue externally, because if I remember who I was 4 or 5 years ago, it was fulfilling for me to run fast and to feel my need for importance, for security externally. And I really think I couldn't have done that otherwise.
I wonder though, if this was a coaching session, I would ask you questions.
Yeah, you can. You can.
Okay. So I would question whether or not it was the sense of importance that was giving meaning to that period of your life, or the speed. I suspect it was something different.
Yeah. Okay, you're right. It was the perception, the fact that I was doing the more meaningful things I can do, and I was helping people in a way that was the better way I can think of. Yeah. So you're right. It's just that my perception of what is the best way to help people has changed.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay.
This is what's known as a attribution bias. So to explain it in simple terms from a psychological standpoint, we will look at an experience and we will say, this cause is related to this effect. Based on a quick inspection, we'll say, right? But what happens in these cases is very often we misattribute the cause to the effect. So we pick the wrong cause. We're like, this is why. And so I find myself spending a lot of time with people questioning, are you sure that's accurate? Or is that just based on the way you were seeing things at the time? And then when you actually probe deeply, you find, well, hold on a second, no, that's not accurate. And then you find that there's an actual deeper cause that truly resonates with the effect. And then suddenly your perception of that whole experience changes. And you're like, well, actually, no, that wasn't what was giving me meaning. It was something completely different. So, and that's the thing, right? We're not questioning whether or not there was meaning in the experience. We're questioning what gave meaning to that experience, what the meaning was. We're changing that attribution completely. And then suddenly you're like, oh, there's still meaning there, but it's profoundly different. And to me, that's a subtle perspective change that we experience that we don't recognize that we can do at times.
Yeah. I love that.
I can see it. I can see.
Yeah.
I love that.
You know what I love the most about this conversation? It's not it's not a a gift of generosity to my audience. It's for me first that I'm doing this conversation. Yeah,
But see, it still provides meaning to your audience, right?
yeah, yeah,
It's you are getting something selfish from it that you want, but so is your audience. I hope and I trust that they are. Just by listening to you extracting value from this conversation, they get to as well. And that's the beauty of this. So yeah, I love that too.
yeah. I think we could have recorded the conversation we had 2 years ago in Sydney, because I really remember. I don't remember what you said, but I remember how I felt after. It was like I don't know where my feet are.
Yeah. I think I'm sorry about that. That's how you felt.
No,
But
but I love this feeling.
well, yeah. And I walked away from that conversation thinking I should have had a film crew or someone filming that
Yeah,
so we could have
yeah,
that captured. But don't worry, that will happen when we have our event this year, our workshop. We'll make sure that it's captured so that that doesn't happen again.
you have an event this year?
We're planning it. There's no locked in dates, but we're planning for July.
Okay. Wow. What kind of event it is?
It will be an immersive event. We're expecting a 2 or 3 day event with me, and a relatively small group of people, and we will be exploring all of this,
Yeah.
questioning beliefs, how to do so, going inwards, and the intention is to change the inner world, and then use that internal change to then create change in our outer worlds personally, and have that ripple effect. And my intention is just to give as much of the tools that I can to help people do that for themselves.
Yeah. Great.
Yeah.
Do you have your coaching program? It is running now.
So I've got I do have an online program for students to go through. This is teaching them the fundamentals of what I do. It's an online course. We don't have the coaching training yet, which a lot of people have still been asking me for, training people how to coach. I'm still working on that one. That one's taking some time. But that's also part of the impact that
Yeah.
at the beginning part of our conversation, it's part of the scale that's really important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you do some work to cultivate these passions, or is it something you have inside you, or is it neither, or is it both? Because
I like your question. When you ask that question, do you mean on a regular basis? Do I do something to keep the?
yeah, I ask this question because I'm always asking myself, what are what are the quality I see in the people I'm inviting on this podcast, and one of your quality is passions. You seems so passionate, and I would love to develop that. And I'm thinking, how do you do that?
Yeah, that's interesting. I don't know if anyone's ever actually asked me that question before. I mean, there's a small distinction that I can give you, and this is something I think you understand. But to me, it's important in that I don't think of myself as passionate.
Okay.
Um, and the reason being is, at least in English, I don't know if this is true for French, but in English, when you look at the origin or where the word comes from, passion, it comes from Spanish,
Mm.
pasio or patio, which means suffering.
Oh, okay.
So when people talk about being passionate about what they do or having passion in
No, no,
whatever it
no.
is they do, I'm like,
I'm not talking about passion. I'm talking about passions.
oh, patience.
Patience.
Patience. Okay.
Sorry.
Got you. Okay. No,
Yeah,
that's fine.
yeah.
That's my fault too. Okay. Well, there you go for your listeners. In case you were wondering, don't chase passion. It's bullshit.
Yeah.
Look for inspiration, which Julian probably speaks about anyway. Patience. How do I cultivate patience? I do it in many different ways. I use time as a tool. For me, time is, and I think this is well understood, time is a fabrication of the mind. When you study spirituality and you study the underlying fabric of our existence, of our universe, time is an illusion. It's a lie. Einstein started to prove that with his theory on general and special relativity. We thought time was fixed, it was linear. It turns out it's not. In fact, time is just a fabrication of the mind to assist us in experiencing life the way we all understand to experience life. But I think too often we take time at face value. That time is linear. There's linear being there's a line, there's the beginning, there's a middle, and there's the end. Or there's the past, there's the present, and there's the future. I don't believe time to be linear. I've had way too many experiences that tell me that time is not linear. It's far from linear. And so I use time as a tool to reframe my experience. So for example, we were talking earlier about impact and what I'm doing long term. And for me, I'm working on goals and targets that I don't expect myself to fulfill them until the year 2054, 2055. That's how far out I'm thinking in terms of the vision. That's not the end, but that's one of a major checkpoint for me if I get there, right? This is assuming that I survive in this body long enough to get there. So I use future in psychology and coaching, they call it future pacing. So you think very far into the future and then you look back from there. I also use the framework of the question, what would I do if I had all the money in the world? What would I spend my time doing? And the reason I ask myself that question is because that immediately prioritizes my time and what I spend my time doing. So for example, if I had all the money in the world, would I be sitting here in my office talking to you right now? The answer to my question is yes, I'd still do this.
For sure.
Right. To you, it's a no-brainer, right? It seems obvious, but to some people, maybe not. They'd be like, oh, maybe not. When I ask people this question, the first answer they give me is I would travel. If I had all the money in the world, I would just travel. Like, okay, great. And then what? Like, what do you mean? I'd just continue traveling. I'm like, okay, but then what? Like, no, I just keep doing that. I said, how long can you sit by a pool at a hotel drinking Mai Tais or martinis before you start going crazy? Be honest with me. And the average answer I get is 6 weeks.
I would think 3 days, but
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I'm with you on that. 3 days and I'm like itchy. Like, I'm like,
yeah,
give me a book, give me something.
yeah, even 1 hour, I think it's too much.
Yep. Yeah, I'd be looking for the library for sure.
Yeah,
Or for the local store that I could buy a Kindle or something. Like I'd need something to feed my mind if I'm not sitting there contemplating and writing. And what's interesting is the answer is usually people would say, well, then I'd want to go and do something. And for some people, it's charity. For some people, it's build a business. For some people, it's go and work in a company. At the essence of what everybody's saying is they want to make a contribution. They want to make a contribution to humanity or to society, however you want to frame the language. For some people, contribution is through business. For some people, contribution is through charity or philanthropy or art, right? And so for me, I think to myself, well, if I had all the time in the world and I had all the money in the world, what would I do? And I keep coming back to, I would want to make a contribution. Not for ego, not for a sense of importance, but just because I have been gifted with knowledge, experience, and wisdom that is not my own, that has transformed my own life, I just want to share that with people, because I could see somebody struggling and I could give them something that would transform their experience. To me, that's fulfilling. More than $1 million in revenue, or, whatever the milestone may be. So I keep coming back to that, and that, I believe, is what gives me patience. That if I just stick with what I'm doing and I continue to make a contribution, then I know that things will work out, and there's a trust in that, because I've seen I've been doing it long enough to see the evidence that that's working, and that if I continue down that path, the compound effect will kick in. The inflection point will occur at some point. I see too often people in whatever journey they're on, they give up way before the compound effect kicks in. And that was me many years ago, before I got into this. I changed things so often that nothing was staying consistent long enough for the compound effect to kick in. And so when I learned that principle from finance about compound interest, and I thought, wait, hold on, this applies to behavior, this applies to habits, this applies to business. I then started to apply that, and I started seeing the effects, which is the organic, it's the slow rate, but I stand by it. I see all the evidence in my life that proves that it works, so I keep leaning on that.
Okay. A lot of people know this intellectually, but they can't seem to follow it in real world. It is because why does this happen for you? What is the difference between you, who know the principles intellectually and is able to follow it, and other people that can't seem to follow it?
I do what I can to rise above my desire for pleasure and my avoidance of pain. That's what makes us impatient.
Yeah.
It's the animal side of who we are, or the less evolved part of the brain is constantly seeking pleasure and avoiding pain. That's what distracts us from sticking with something long enough to yield profound result from the compound effect. I'm not special in comparison to anybody else, other than when I find myself experiencing a desire for short-term gratification, which is just seeking pleasure in this moment, I will look for a way to rise above that desire. Or if I'm experiencing pain, I will look for a way to reframe the pain rather than avoid it, which is usually what helps me continue down my path.
Yeah.
We don't, there's no journey in life that you don't experience challenge or pain. And there's no journey in life that you don't get tempted by pleasure. For me, it's about not giving into these two things to the best of my ability, because if there's so many stories and mythology throughout history of the temptation of pleasure, the temptation of desire, whether it's money, sex, fame, right? Importance is one of them, or glamour. And then the other side is the avoidance of pain, torture, heartbreak, loss, anxiety, sometimes physical pain. We will do all these things to avoid pain, and we'll do all these things to seek pleasure. And with modern society, avoiding pain and experiencing pleasure is so accessible.
Yeah.
So I do my best to transcend those desires to avoid pain and seek pleasure. And that's what helps me stay on that path long enough to actually see the results. It's hard. It's not easy. I can sit here and say it and it sounds really easy. Oh, you just do that. Okay, I'll do that. But it's what has gotten me where I am today.
Yeah. Not that I can. Yeah, I think that this is one of your first principles to live by that. What are the other principles that you are trying to live by?
A big one that I carry is my beliefs are not necessarily truth. Just because I believe it doesn't mean that it's true. Which goes back to what we were saying earlier. I question what I believe because I believe, like, who am I? I'm not God. I'm not the universe. I didn't create this place. I'm a part of it. So just because I believe something doesn't necessarily mean that it's true. I have something to learn. And so I'm willing to question my beliefs. That's been a big one that has transformed my life significantly in a very humbling way. It's funny. I was having this conversation with someone recently. Excuse the story.
Love the story.
Okay. Right. I think a lot of people can relate to that. Right. I must have been 16 and I thought I had all the answers. Right. Nobody could teach me anything new after 16 years of being alive. I must have been only speaking English for 14 years at that point. Right. But I had all the answers to life. And at such a young age, I had the most certainty that I knew everything there was to know. Interestingly, though, it was a period of my life where I was experiencing the most difficulty and pain and the most challenge. I was the most disempowered at that point. But interestingly, I also believed I had all the answers. I would argue today, I am the most empowered I have ever been. And I believe I have the least amount of answers and I have the most to learn. And I believe that there is a correlation in this thinking that determines our empowerment. Because people ask me questions all the time, like, what's the answer to this? And I don't necessarily give them an immediate answer. Like, well, it could be this, it could be that, it could be this, it could be that. And there's probably some other things we could explore around that too. And sometimes they're a little dissatisfied with my answer because they just wanted something concrete.
Yeah.
But I say things today and I know that in 10 years' time, my perspective on some of the things that I might say today will change. Some things will stay the same, but some things will change because I learn. So that a really long way of me saying questioning my beliefs is what has gotten me the furthest so far. And I am committed to continuing that for as long as I live.
Do you have a process for that, or does it happen organically in your mind?
Questioning my beliefs? I've actually been thinking about this again recently. This is something I've been thinking a lot about because it's something I want to teach at this workshop that we do.
Yeah.
And assisting people how to question their beliefs. I've got a rough idea. It's mostly been organic in my mind. But the general idea that I give people is most of us have an idea of where we want to go in our lives. So we'll have a goal or a destination in mind. We are here. There is that destination. And there's a path to navigate to get there. What stops us from going down that path is a belief. We believe something will happen, so we don't bother. Or we believe it's not possible. Or we believe there's going to be some kind of pain or something that we will experience that we don't want to experience, so we don't do it. And so I question myself, well, what do I imagine will happen? Why do I believe that I can't get there? Or what is the story that I'm telling myself? And I will just listen to what I have that comes up. I listen. For some people, writing is preferred. For me, I will just do it. I go for a walk each day. And if I find that it's valuable for me at that time to question some beliefs, I will just have this dialogue with myself. What do I believe will happen? And I will hear a story come up. And the moment I hear the story, I know that it's a belief because it's a story. There's some drama, there's some emotion associated with whatever the story is. And then in terms of, I can take you through some of the process if you like. Once I've become aware of what the belief is, the first thing I do is I look for where it starts, where it originates, because we all develop a belief somewhere in our past. Now, like you mentioned earlier, you don't like using the word limiting beliefs. For me, that has been a big problem with this industry that I'm in, that they keep referring to them as limiting beliefs. But what we don't realize is that when you trace back where your belief originated, you discover that at the time you formed that belief, you believed it would serve you and it would help you. At the time that you developed the belief, you didn't see it as limiting. You saw it as supportive and helpful. So what has changed is that you're holding on to this belief. Your life has changed, but you've been holding on to this belief. It's like having the latest phone, the latest iPhone, with software that's 6 years old. It doesn't work the same. It doesn't function the same. You don't have the same usability because so much about life has changed that we use our phones differently. So it's the same thing. We developed a belief at some point in the past, and we haven't updated the belief to suit us now. And so too often this industry calls it limiting. It's not limiting. Because at the time, it was actually helping you. So I look back to where it starts. Where did I develop this belief? What was the event or the experience in my life where this belief formed? And we can usually identify relatively quickly where some kind of emotionally charged experience happened and we developed this belief and we pulled out our little notebook. I call it our little rule book for life, where we store our beliefs, and we go, okay, in this situation, this event leads to pain. Great. And then we store that in our mind. And then when we come to another experience that's similar in some small way to that first event, we pull out this little notebook and we're like, hold on, page 37. I hear it says this situation leads to pain. Okay, let's react the same way we did to that first time. And then bang, same reaction. Yeah. And what are you doing? You're just, with the confirmation bias, you're just entrenching this belief even more. So, and then you just keep repeating the same thing over and over and over again. So I go back to where it starts, to the best of my ability, because the moment I developed that belief, I thought it was going to serve me at the time. And I want to change that because while it may have served me at the time, it's no longer serving me with what I'm trying to create. And so I almost think about it like an anchor to a ship. And it's weighing the ship down. And so I want to think of the belief as, at one point, it kept me secure. It kept me safe. But now it's stopping me from sailing, from journeying and crossing the seas. So I want to thank the anchor, but let it go. Thank you for helping me. Thank you for serving me. Thank you for protecting me. But I'm going to let it go. And then when you let it go with a sense of gratitude, you liberate yourself of holding on to that belief. That's not the exact steps that I follow to change the perception around the belief, but that's the essence of what I'm doing when I'm letting go of a belief. I don't want to judge it and throw it away. I want to appreciate it and say, thanks for doing your job. But I don't need that anymore.
And how do you know if the thoughts that you have, because a belief is just thoughts in a form, in a way, how do you know if the thought you have is not just protecting you from pursuing something that is not your values? Because I don't know if you understand my question, because sometimes people say that it's a limiting belief, but other people can see it with a different angles and tell that no, it's not a limiting belief. It's just something that is protecting you from being something that you're not, and from becoming something that you're not. And
I'm of the view that when people are using the word limiting belief, they're coming from a place of judgment. That the word limiting is a judgmental word, that it is a belief that is bad and you should get rid of it, eliminate it, kill it. But if you're coming into your experience and your past with this perspective that having that belief is bad, you don't get to experience a sense of gratitude for it. And coming back to one of, my first principles that you were talking about, I seek gratitude and I seek the gift in all of my experiences. And that's not I don't want people to confuse that with positive thinking, because that's nonsense. Gratitude for me is getting to the heart, to the core of the experience and extracting value from that. And so if you're coming into trying to change your belief with a judgment, you're immediately stopping yourself from extracting value from the experience and extracting the gift or gratitude. This is why I was using the image of anchor, that you say, thank you for serving me when you did. It was a gift, but I no longer need you, right?
Yeah.
A lot of people do project, though. A lot of people do project their stuff onto others. They're projecting that this is limiting. According to what? I was referencing before our conversation earlier, we were talking about the bookshelf behind me and how my students made the comment of wanting to organize my books according to the color coordination. What I didn't share with you was after that call, they asked me, if you start thinking about arranging your books by colors, can you at least let us know? That way we know we've had an influence on your thinking. I'm like, okay, sure, I'll do that. And I've got about 10 or 12 books on my desk just here from books that I read last year that I want to write all the notes out of. And then when I finish writing my notes, I put them back on the bookshelf. And I did that with one book. It's just over here somewhere, small one, blue one. Now, it's a small blue book and I put it next to other blue books. So I messaged my students and I said, I just returned a small blue book to my bookcase next to another blue book. And they were all celebrating, yay, oh my God, amazing, we've had an influence on him. And then yesterday, what I didn't tell them was that the reason I put it there was because there was space, not because I don't have space anywhere else, and that was the only spot that it fit. It just happened to be next to the blue books. Yesterday, I put another book up. I think it's like here somewhere. It's like a light blue book there, but it's between. That one is yellow, and the one next to it is black. So I sent that to my group, to my students, and I said, I just put a blue book between a yellow one and a black one. How does that feel? And they were all like, oh my God, we're going backwards. We were making so much progress. This is heartbreaking. It's making my brain itch. And I asked the question, I was like, well, you've made progress relative to what? In comparison to what? Because to use your language, Julian, you were saying it's a projection of values.
Yeah.
They valued the color coordination of my office, right? To me, I don't see it as backwards movement. They do, because they're measuring it according to whatever their values are and whatever they believe is progress. To me, my measurement of progress is, does it fit on my bookshelf and is it in the appropriate category? That makes sense to me.
Yeah.
Because this doesn't need to be pretty. For me, this is primarily functional. I need this to store the books that I study and I read regularly.
Yeah.
Whereas for them, they want it to be visually pretty. Yeah.
Maybe it could be a good check before changing a belief to ask ourselves, is it really aligned with my values? And after, maybe when this first question is checked, I can examine the belief behind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I ask myself, what matters to me? What's important to me? Which is the question of values. What do I value?
Yeah.
I use a slightly different framing of language. Like, is this important to me? Is this something that has a level of priority to me?
Why?
When it comes,
Why do you use
the reason being is because the word value has different meanings. And I think sometimes that can get confusing. Yeah. Whereas priority or importance, it's pretty clear in terms of our understanding of the meaning of it. So if you asked me 5 years ago to start looking at prams for babies or a stroller, I would have no idea. But then when my daughter was coming, I had a very clear understanding of the stroller market and the product options because it was important to me at that point. So I think we just generally understand importance or priority very quickly as a language framing. Now, for me, what's really important is that we know who we are as an individual, because then when we know who we are, we understand what is important to us and what is a priority very quickly, which then makes it very easy for you to ask yourself, is this important, or is this concern, or whatever this issue is, something that serves what I believe is important? The way I think of that is, if you know who you are, and this is something I talk about in my book, it's actually the first chapter, and there's a reason it's the first chapter. It's to know yourself, to know who you are. This is something the Greeks spoke about 350 to 500 BC. And they had it was such a strong statement and belief in that era that there was a temple in Delphi that had an oracle, which was like the classical Greek version of a coach, with a little bit of there was a little bit of like magic and illusionary stuff going on, like smoke and mirrors, and there was probably a little bit of fraudulent activity, I'm sure. But at the time, they actually had across the head of the temple, they had a few different statements, sort of like first principles. One of them was everything in moderation, and another one was know thyself, or know yourself. So it was very important. This goes back a really long time. This is not something new as a concept. For me, the way I think of knowing who we are, it's like having a compass that works. So many people live their lives with a compass that doesn't actually connect with north, with the magnetic north. It's just sort of floating, spinning, going round and round in circles. And so I like to use the analogy of sailing through life on a yacht or a boat as sort of like a image of our journey through life. And so if you're sailing, let's say through the Mediterranean, we use the Mediterranean as an example. You're sailing through the Mediterranean and you've come in through, you're coming through Gibraltar from, Spain and Morocco. You're coming through into the mouth of the Mediterranean, you start sailing through, and you're heading east. Now, you might come up to some land while you're sailing, and you look down at your compass, but the compass is spinning. It's going round and round and round and round in circles. You don't know which way to go. You just see land, and you're like, I don't know if I should go that way, if I should go that way. I just know maybe I should avoid the land so I don't crash, but then I don't know where to go from there. But if you know who you are, that's like having a compass that locks on to north. So then the moment you come up to land, the first thing you do is you pull out your compass and you look, hold on a second, which way am I facing? And the reason you know which way you're facing is because your compass is locked onto magnetic north. So you immediately know your position relative to north. And then you ask yourself, is this where I want to be going? Am I heading in the direction that makes sense for me? You can't do that if you don't know yourself. You can only have a true sense of direction if you know who you truly are. And so for me, digging deep on who you are, getting an understanding of who you are, and then understanding your priorities or your values, as you've described it, or what's important to you, all of that makes a lot of sense and it becomes much clearer. And then decision making, because a lot of people get stuck with indecision, they don't know how to make decisions. Decision making becomes really quick because you know exactly where you want to go and what you're doing. So then people will present something to you. They're like, hey, what about this? And people could be some marketing campaign on Instagram. It could be some ad that's popped up halfway through a YouTube video. It could be anything, right? Yeah. Someone presenting something to you, an option, an opportunity, and you immediately look at that and you go, nope, doesn't make sense for me. It doesn't align with what's important to me.
Yeah.
Which is why my students get all uncomfortable about the colors, and I'm like, doesn't matter. It's not important.
Yeah. So for you, answering the question who I am is the same one that's answering the
Mhm.
question about what's important for me?
Not exactly. Asking who am I can lead to the answers of what is important to me. So they're connected, but they're not the same. Because what we determine as important or what is valuable to us is the result of who we are.
Okay. And what's included in the question who am I, that is not included in the question what's important for me?
I think there's more depth to the question, who am I, than there is what's important to me.
Okay.
Because what's important to you changes over the course of your lifetime. Maybe for you, I know for me, when I was a teenager, chasing girls was important to me. Now, no, it's of no interest to me. I can't think of a bigger waste of time. I'm a very married man. The
You're so
idea
wise.
of yeah, maybe, or maybe I'm just scared. I don't know. I'll be questioning that one for a few years. But like, what we believe is important changes. At this point, like there was a point in your life where maybe money was more important than it is now, the acquisition of money. And then in 10 or 15 years' time, it may be important again to you. It may have zero importance to you, right? Does that change who you are? No, because you can still be you throughout all of these periods and all these chapters of your life where different things are important to you, but you are still you all the way through. Maybe unconsciously at times, you're being unconsciously you, but you are still you.
What is you?
That's a good question. We tend to, it's funny, we ask the question, who am I? I think a more profound question is, what am I?
Okay.
Because when we ask the question, who am I? This is getting really deep, by the way. I hope
Yeah,
your
yeah.
audience is, they've had enough caffeine. So,
Levi will listen the episode.
okay. Levi, welcome back to this world. So I should probably say, if any of your listeners feel the way you felt after that conversation we had in that bookshop, if any of you feel dizzy or like there is no ground under you, you can blame Julian. That's not my fault because he's asking the questions.
Yeah.
So for me, when we're asking the question, who am I? We immediately look for identity.
Mm-hmm.
And identity is associated with our ego. Now,
Mm-hmm.
from a psychological standpoint, at least, the ego is the one that experiences pride and shame, anxiety, overconfidence, all kinds of different emotions. Our and also a sense of reputation or importance, right? That is our ego desire to feel important. When you're asking yourself, what am I? You're peering or you're looking beyond the ego. You're looking beyond the identity and asking, what am I? What is the essence of I? What does I mean? Why am I using the word I or the letter I, for example,
Mm-hmm.
or me? And so we start to look through the facade, the projection, if you like, and you start to look at what is beyond this hologram of an individual.
Mm-hmm.
And you start to see there is an essence there. There is a spiritual component. We sometimes call it spirit or soul or essence. That's a word I've been using. Or some people just call themselves a being.
Mm-hmm.
And you start to kind of question, okay, well, if I'm starting to remove the sense of identity, if I'm not Giorgio, I am something beyond Giorgio. Giorgio is just a label. This body that I'm using, I think of as a ship. So if you think about, I'll go down this tangent for a moment, and hopefully I don't lose your audience into the open ocean. I've consulted many people on dealing with death. In my life, I have experienced a lot of close deaths. I think the last time I checked the numbers was, I think 16 deaths now. Oh, no, more, because we've just had some recent ones a few months ago. So it might be closer to 20 now. I'll have to check the numbers. But I've experienced a lot of death in my life. And I've consulted many people who have dealt with death. The framework of thinking that I use, the visual image that I like to give people, is if you think about the body that we associate our sense of self with as a ship, and the soul or the spirit or the essence as the captain. So we come here on this physical plane, to get spiritual for a moment, we come here to this existence and we use this vessel to explore this world. The captain goes and buys a ship to explore the ocean. So that's what we've done. We have acquired a vessel to help us explore this ocean of life. But then where people start to struggle with death and grief is that most people believe that when the ship has gotten old or it's beyond repair, it's broken down so much that it can't be repaired anymore, and the ship starts to sink, most people perceive life as the captain going down with the ship. What actually happens is the captain steps off the ship while the ship sinks. The captain steps off at the dock, which is, I don't want to go too far into that, because that's like a whole day just to talk about that. But the captain steps off this ship. So the ship sinks. That's the body. But the essence and the soul, and there's research that now backs this up, continues to exist. Some people call it, especially in the scientific realm, they call it consciousness. And there's some really beautiful research out there, and some really lovely books that talk about this and prove this. So for me, when I look at the essence of the individual, they're more than an identity, because the identity might die. We associate, like, this is Giorgio's body, but at some point Giorgio is going to die and the body's no longer going to exist. The vessel or the ship no longer exists, that everyone called Giorgio, right? It was the ship that couldn't quite grow enough hair, right? And so at some point, the essence of who I am is going to continue. It's going to continue to exist beyond this physical body. But I'm no longer associated with the body. And so by asking the question, what am I, instead of who am I let go of the identity that I've formed with this body. I let go of the identity that people have associated with me. A reputation, people think that they know who I am, is just based on their memories of me. Because they have memories of the way I've behaved, and so they're expecting my behavior to line up with the way they remember my behavior. That's it. That's what reputation is. It's just memory. But if I go through and erase everybody's memory, my reputation changes. My identity can change. We see this a lot when people move cities. You experience this as well to some extent. When we move, some people will move a city from one country to another country, halfway across the world, and they feel liberated that they can create a whole new identity and a whole new life for themselves in this new city because nobody knows them. All that does to me is that highlights how much we associate with the identity, with the ego, and we're not asking the question, what am I? Rather than who am I?
What answers have you found in the question, what I am? What?
I have some answers. I certainly don't have all of them. I will probably spend my entire life asking that question. I believe I am an expression of light. I'm a reflection of light. As long as I continue to look beyond the ego of who I am, I will continue to get a clearer understanding of what that light actually is. And I don't mean that in a prophecy, I am the Messiah, I am the light. I want to be really clear about that because that's how it can sound. I'm talking through the lens of optical physics. When you study optical physics, we can see that looking at biology and taking it down to the atomic level and then going from the atomic level to the subatomic level, the subatomic particles that make up atoms, we see expressions of light. That these particles act like waves and particles, just like light does. And there's a correlation between the two. And so to me, it's fascinating that the fundamental building blocks of our existence, including you and I, that we call I, are just expressions of light at different levels of density, at different levels of expression. And what's cool, what I believe is really fascinating about all of this is just like, Isaac Newton had the prism, the triangle glass that he developed. When you pass white light through one angle of the prism, it separates the spectrum of light and shows you the different colors. I think your audience would pretty much understand this, but white light and all the colors within that is a very narrow spectrum of true light. That's all that we can see with our senses, with our eyes. And then our brain can interpret a little more than that, but as far as visible light, it's very limited. The full spectrum of light is huge. It's incredible. It's beyond anything. Like if you think about, it's almost like a drop in the ocean compared to the ocean. That's how much light there is. We just can't perceive it. So it's there, it's everywhere. But our biology has been developed to filter out that light so we can't see that. So what's fascinating to me, because we don't have a real way to measure this yet, and maybe we will, I don't know when, maybe long after I die. But I believe each and every one of us is almost like a prism.
What is a prism?
And we are, a prism is that the glass triangle from Isaac Newton. So each of us is a prism, uniquely shaped, uniquely designed, and light passes through us. I don't know the source of the light. I don't know where it originates, but light passes through us, and we all express and demonstrate and spread this light, which is what I'm defining as expressing it, in a unique display. And that expression evolves over our life as we develop, as we refine, as we polish the different parts of the glass, the different parts of the prism, and we get clearer and clearer and clearer. And we work through the stories and the illusions. For some people, it doesn't change because they don't evolve, and that's okay. But everyone is so unique in their shape and their design that when the light that I believe we're all connected to passes through us, it expresses differently and it projects different colors and different patterns. I think the challenge that most people face is they see the light that's coming out of them. If almost you think of like a projector onto the wall or in a movie theater, they believe what they see on the screen and they believe that to be true. So it's like if as a child, we would have watched a movie and we look up at the screen and we feel like everything we're seeing is real. But it's a projector sitting at the back of the room just shining images up on a screen. If you turn that projector off, what appeared to be real disappears. And I think too often people are buying into the stories that they've accumulated and these beliefs and these perspectives on life and they see them as real, and they're not willing to question, maybe this is just an illusion, maybe it's just some kind of shadow or some kind of projection of light, and maybe I can manipulate that and change that or clear it out. So that's my really long answer of what I believe we are as individuals. I have no way to scientifically validate that. I think the only way I can really validate that is if I die, and then I'll come back. I'll send you a message. I'll send you a DM on Instagram and tell you what I find. But actually, what's really interesting? If you study, there's a book, I don't know if it's been translated into French, but there is a book called After by Dr. Bruce Grayson.
Okay.
He's a medical doctor, and he studied near-death experiences. A near-death experience is defined as somebody who clinically and physiologically dies and then comes back to life.
Yeah.
And what he found with the reports of these near-death experiences is not dissimilar to what I just described. It's a fascinating world to explore. And near-death experiences have been reported as far back as, my understanding goes as far back as the Greeks, 350 BC. In fact, Plato wrote about it in his book, The Republic. He wrote about a near-death experience at the end of the book. So they have been reported for thousands of years. And what's fascinating is I sort of had this visual that I just described to you. And then I started reading all these different texts and all these different books that were starting to validate some of the way that I was seeing it, and also helping me refine the way I was seeing that. And I thought, whoa, there's something here. If other people are saying something similar. Yeah.
When you spoke about the prism and you're just, there is some light, I had tears when you were saying that, and I didn't really understand why, but I know that there is some truth, even if my mind is not able to understand it.
That's how I felt when I first started looking into it through that. When I first started asking myself those questions, and then I eventually started to realize that maybe this is what it is, I had the same experience. I felt my heart opened. I started getting tears in my eyes. I was speechless. I had goosebumps, and I was humbled. When it all sort of came to me, I just was like, okay. I think that was the first thing I said. I'm like, that's a lot for Monday.
Yeah.
So, yeah. It's fascinating. So that's what I've discovered to the answer to the question, what am I, when I look beyond the ego. And so this is what sometimes clashes for me. This is where I sometimes struggle with how important is seeking important. How do I reconcile these two, the very earthly competitive world of business with what I just described to you, right?
Yeah. I struggle too with that.
Yeah.
It don't seem to be better with yours. I don't necessarily want to play with the rules that are in place today. And sometimes I'm like, do I have a problem? Or is it something else? Or is it neither? Or
well, it's both, right?
It's both.
It's great. Like, oh, maybe it's both, maybe it's neither. What's interesting to me is, and I found this to be true for myself, and I also found this truth in the studies of near-death experiences, which was really interesting. And it was kind of relieving for me to discover this when I was reading all these reports of near-death experiences. And I'll talk about what I mean. The more I developed this sort of spiritual awareness of consciousness beyond my psychology, beyond who I think I am. And I was struggling to reconcile it with, well, how do I operate in business? How do I operate in the marketplace, in the real world? And I was struggling with, how do I connect what all the business mentors and coaches were teaching me about how to build a business and my understanding of business and economics with what means something to me personally on a spiritual level, which is, they're all teaching, understand your competitors. You've got to, what else do we hear? If they're not spending money with you, they're spending money with your competitor, right? If they're not your customer, they're someone else's customer. And I was like, okay, I understand these concepts, and you've got to be hungry. You've got to go for it. You've got to push. You've got to grind. And I'm like, none of this is resonating with me, but I was going along with it because I thought, okay, well, it must be working for them. And it never worked for me. I couldn't get it to work. I didn't know why. And then I experienced a lot of doubt in my ability in business and economics of being able to just generate revenue in my business. I thought, there's something wrong with me. And then I eventually realized the issue is not me. The issue is that I was taking things on that did not align with me, which comes back to the question of importance and priorities. I was checking my compass. They were saying, go this way. And I was checking my compass going, well, it doesn't seem right for me to go that way, but I'll do it because they're telling me to. When you're saying something like that to yourself, you are guaranteed to fail because you are not being authentic. You are not honoring yourself and who you truly are. But I was listening to them because I was giving them more authority, because I believed that they had more experience, because they had more money than I did. So I thought they must be right. They were also older than me. This is where the attribute bias came into play. I assumed that because they had more money, they knew more. It doesn't mean that they know more than me. Not necessarily. They've just generated more money than me. That's the actual fact. That doesn't mean they know more than me, which was interesting for me to sort of reframe and look at. And then I found when I studied near-death experiences, this is where things got really interesting. For everybody that goes through these near-death experiences that tend to be quite spiritual in nature, they start to wake up to a lot of what I was sharing that is beyond our psychology and our identity. There's a few things that they come back with. One that was consistent amongst all of the cases, they no longer had a fear of death. That was interesting to me. Because when you drill down everybody's fears, it ultimately comes down to a fear of death. That's what everyone's ultimately scared of, which is true, but it's also not true. People aren't actually scared of death. People are scared of what they will experience on their path to death, if it's physical suffering or something like that. When it comes to the other thing that they came back with was they had no interest in being competitive. The idea of competition had no significance to them at all. To them, they saw it as a complete waste of time. Sports games, business, any form of where people were trying to compete another individual, it meant nothing to them after they came back from these near-death experiences. And I thought, that's really fascinating. If that's true for people who have these really deep and overwhelming spiritual experiences, and then they come back to the competitive plane, we might call it, or the world that is very competitive, and they don't want to participate in the competition, then how do we reconcile these two? And it hit me. I worked it out. When you're being authentic, when you are aligning yourself with who you truly are, there is no competition. Competition is irrelevant at that point. Nobody can compete with an authentic individual because you are, by definition, authentic. You are one of one. Not one of 100, one of one. So there's no competition anymore. And I realized as long as I'm being authentic, no one can compete with me. People can try and copy me. People can replicate everything I do, but I know that my signature is on, as long as I'm being authentic. It's important That's a really important note. Authenticity is important. Authenticity is the signature that we put on our work. So as long as I'm being authentic, competition doesn't matter.
Okay. I think I've just understood that with what you're saying, that it's like I feel like that now I can't compete anymore to the degree I was doing this in the past. It's like there's something that feels wrong with that. But I need to develop the trust that if I'm doing it my way without trying to compete, things will be fine.
Yep, exactly. They call it, what do they call it in marketing? USP, unique
Yeah. Selling proposition.
selling proposition. Yeah. The important word there is unique,
Yeah.
right? It's authentic. It's the authenticity that makes it unique. So if you work out what the USP is, you could call it the authenticity selling proposition, right? ASP,
And
like that distinguishes you immediately.
yeah. And I just hear the word unique, because unique is you, and Nick is Nike, the
Goddess of victory.
yeah, exactly.
Yep, exactly. So to experience victory in the marketplace, you just need to be you.
Yeah. Amazing conclusion.
Yep.
Yeah.
I've found that to be true.
I think you can win by competing, and you always fear that somebody will take your place.
So have you really won?
It's another radical to say you only win the game when you're able to step out of the game.
Exactly. Because then you have no longer associated your sense of self with the game. That's your identity. I'll use your experience. I am a tennis player. So when you stop playing tennis player, who are you? Well, I don't know.
And I was so desperate after.
Right. Yeah. And so what that's like is it's almost like floating in space. There's no gravity. So you're trying to fall to the ground, but you can't. You're trying to climb, like sort of float up to grab something and you can't. So you're just sort of hanging. And because you're hanging in this void, you experience that desperation. So you will grab anything that comes along out of desperation.
Yeah, that's true.
That's why I encourage people to ask themselves, who are you? And then what are you beyond that? Because then it stops mattering. If I shut my business down tomorrow, I know who I am. I'll get bored. Right? I might have to buy some more books. I'll get bored because I enjoy serving people. I enjoy having conversations with people. But I still know who I am if the business disappears. Or if my wife decides to leave me, she doesn't want to be with me, and she takes my daughter with her because that serves my daughter in terms of having someone to be there, I will be upset. But I still know who I am. So this is why I believe it's what activates our personal compass, because the moment you realize who you are, your compass gets activated, and then navigating life, the world, is much easier with a compass that works.
Make me want to go to a, I don't know if it's the same word in English, but in French we say vipassana. Do you know that?
The yoga meditation retreats.
Because my best friend 5 years ago, we was living together, and I was really into making money, just following the KPI, and he was in his existential crisis when he was saying to me, uh, either I can answer who I am. Either maybe I will I will kill myself. And I need to answer this question. And he went for 20 days meditation retreat. And I was like, why is he losing his time with all these things? And now I understand. I really understand this quest.
Yeah. I think we all have a innate desire to understand who we are. And people will use different paths to get there. I have never been on a yoga retreat like that. I haven't been on a meditation retreat. I haven't done 20 days sitting in a mountain or a cave. Everything that I'm sharing with you, I have learned through my life that you would consider somewhat ordinary in comparison to something like that. You know, living in a modern city, you know, access to modern tools and technology, nothing unusual, at least on the surface. So, yeah, it's everybody. I think it depends on the depth of the crisis. For me, I've gone very deep in ways like that for myself, but I intentionally did it on my own, but at home. Do we have time?
Yeah, we are. Yeah.
I'll share this story. I don't think I've shared this story publicly, but I don't mind sharing it here. Years ago, I was going through a really big struggle internally. I had a lot of big questions about me, my life, existence, and the life of people as well. But I had a lot of my stories were coming up for me, and I wasn't entirely sure what to do with them. And so I said to my wife, I'm going to go away into my office, and I'm going to do a lot of work on myself. I'm going to go inward, and I'm probably going to be doing a lot of crying at different times, maybe even loud crying. Do not come into the office. Do not come and try and rescue me. Don't try and save me, reassure me, or comfort me. I'm going inward. I'm going deep. I will be okay. But it's probably going to sound really strange and maybe even scary. That you can hear your husband in the other room sobbing, sounding like he's in a lot of pain, and that all you want to do is nurture him and protect him. You don't need to do that. I'll be okay. And I went into an internal retreat, if you want to call it that. I regressed myself. I went back through lots of past experiences that I had been through that I didn't realize I was still carrying a lot of emotion about. And I worked through and I was changing my perception of all these different experiences. I think it was about 3 or 4 hours. I just kept going deeper and deeper and deeper into the darkest corners of my mind and my life. And I went, when I thought I couldn't go further, just like at the gym, you think you can't do one more rep, one more repetition. I said, no, we're doing one more. We're doing 2 more. And I kept going and going. And my intention was to go as far into the darkness as I could, shift my perspective of it, experience gratitude, and turn the light on in these places in my life, in my psychology, in my experience in my life, in my soul, if you want to call it that. Because then I knew if I could go to the deepest, darkest places of my experience in my life and change my perception of those places, and then come back from that with a sense of gratitude and appreciation for what was once overwhelming me, I could do that for anybody with total certainty. And so I say that because I've had many people who have said, like you've just shared, a yoga retreat or a meditation retreat might be valuable. What's been really popular the last few years has been ayahuasca retreats.
Yeah.
Right? And sometimes even the cold immersion retreats, like what Wim Hof has made really popular. Now, I've had clients that have worked with me for years, and then they've gone on this ayahuasca retreat or these cold immersion retreats, and they're like, it doesn't do the same thing for me anymore, because I feel like what I did with the work with you was so deep that these retreats was almost like going back to kindergarten in comparison. So I think it's important to sort of help people understand that you may very well find value from doing these experiences. I don't want to say it's a waste of time by any means, because people do come away with value from these experiences, but that isn't necessarily the only way for you to have a profound insight about your life. You can do that with one perspective change while you're walking through the park that you walk through every day. That's been my experience. So, and I kind of love that about my experience, because then I get to be an example of how ordinary life can be really profound.
Yeah, and you are for sure. Because when I was preparing the interview yesterday, it was one thing that I really love about you, which is you seems to have to be passionate, to be calm, to love your life, to have a dad life, to stay. You're not traveling and posting on Instagram in five stars hotel everywhere, but you you are an example of living a life of depth and and love and gratitude and for me you are an example of a wise man, and I know that I can have answer with you about every subject. Yeah.
Thank you. That means a lot to me. It really does. It's been part of what I believe is my mission or purpose, if you can call it that, to make these insights and these understandings accessible to people and relatable. So to hear that that's happening with just the way I'm living my life and sharing what I'm learning, that means a lot to me. That tells me that it's working.
Yeah. And you're
So thank you.
inspiring people that try to live an extraordinary life and finish by being inspired by people that live an ordinary life.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So, I say that now, but I won't tell you tomorrow I'm going to go and buy 5 Rolexes and rent a private plane.
Tell me, I have some Rolex to sell you.
Yeah, no, I don't. There's not very many luxuries in my life. Honestly, what I find luxurious is things like these.
Yeah.
And I think about it. I think about how different life was before the printing press. I don't think many people realize this, but it was only a few hundred years ago, where not only were women not taught how to read, but most men didn't know how to read. The only people that knew how to read were priests, monks, and some royalty, but very few royalty. The royalty were taught by priests and monks how to read and write.
Yeah.
So my mother-in-law can't read or write English or her native language, Maltese. And I've seen the struggle that she has had in her life because of that.
Yeah.
The impact that has had on her life. So the fact that I've learned how to read and write, to me, feels like an absolute luxury.
Yeah. Yeah. And in centuries, people will look at us and say, they didn't have robots, and they they didn't have robots, and they cannot use AI and all of that.
Right. Yeah, they were laughing at us like, oh,
They,
do
they,
you
they
remember
was
that thing?
forced to,
Do you
to
remember that?
accumulate a library.
Yeah, yeah. In a house, they had a library. Imagine. Um, yeah, and they're all looking at us like, do you remember that tool that they used to use in 2024 called ChatGPT? What a joke, right? But the funny thing is they'll be having this conversation with whatever their general intelligence is, right? They'll have some robot in their home that they're having that conversation with. Tell me about the year 2024 when humanity was like cavemen and cavewomen. So yeah, but I don't know. The simple things are really, to me, a luxury. So I'm grateful that I get to read. I'm grateful that I get to write, because what a gift. What a profound gift. I've learned so much just by those two gifts.
Thank you, Giorgio, for your time today. It was an amazing conversation, like every conversation I have with you. And I will be happy to be able to re-listen it. I will be the first the first listener of this interview. So thank you.
Thank you. It's been a privilege, an honor, and I'm deeply grateful that I've had the opportunity to have this conversation with you. And my hope is that it has an impact on you, but also at least one person in your audience. That would mean the world to me.
I'm just curious about something to end this conversation. Sometimes when I'm
Sure.
Speaking, at the end of the conversation, I'm like, oh, I learned something by speaking because I was not aware that I was thinking that. Um, is there something that you learned today about yourself?
That's an interesting question. The first thing that comes to mind, this might sound strange to you, because, we've known each other for some years now. But the first thing that comes to mind is that I know more than I realize. I don't fully know what I know.
Yeah.
I couldn't possibly.
Yeah.
And I find that is revealed to me through the questions that people ask me.
Yeah.
That's how I find out what I know.
Yeah.
So that's the first thing. And I think it's also important to add to that I know what I know because I learned it. It was something that I learned. We can very quickly, and this happened to me many years ago, we can quickly develop a sense of pride and arrogance about what we know. That's when we start to get into trouble. That's the 16-year-old me that I was telling you about. I know everything there is to know, right? So as I started to learn more and more, I started to associate a sense of pride with what I knew, but I wasn't creating it. Like I was the first person to have this thought in the history of humanity. Come on. That's not true. Right? So I know what I know because I've learned that. And so by being able to share this with you, you've helped me see a glimpse of how much I know or how much I've learned.
Don't you think that sometimes if someone is asking you a question and you're answering, it's like sometimes you can download something that is in the cloud, but it's not. So maybe it's not something that you learn. No?
Well, I'm learning it as it's coming through.
Okay. Yeah.
I'm still learning it. It's not mine.
Okay. Gotcha.
But yes, I agree with you. Yeah, that's listening to intuition. That's listening to, like you said, a download of some kind. But the question is, where did that come from? Where is that cloud? Where's that server?
I don't know.
Right? Yeah. So that to
ask ChatGPT.
I might have to ask ChatGPT 4. I don't know if 3.5 will know. But to me, that comes back to what I was saying about us being the prism of this that is expressing this light. The question is, where is this light coming from? To me, that's the download.
Yeah.
So,
Great.
Yeah. Thank you for the opportunity for me to learn and for me to have this conversation with you.
Thank you very much.
It's been really lovely.
Yeah.